Welcome to the 902 podcast, the official podcast of the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm Captain Vik, and I want to thank you for listening. This podcast will give you an inside look at LSO with topics and guests to discuss public safety issues impacting Lancaster County. Be sure to subscribe for highlights on news, cases, and the people working for you at LSO. You can also follow us across social media at LSO Nebraska on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Welcome to the 902 podcast. Back in studio today to talk a little bit about threat assessment. Sheriff Wagner is here.
Good afternoon.
Chief Deputy Houchin.
Happy Friday.
Our special guest today, Dr. Mario Scalora.
Greetings.
Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.
We brought you on to talk about threat assessment, threat management. We'll get into the nomenclature in a little bit, but we wanted to know a little bit more about you before, help our listeners figure out, you know a thing or two about this stuff.
A little bit.
We wouldn't have asked you otherwise. So help us. Where are you from, Mario? How did you become you? It's a winding path.
Yeah. It is a winding path and a long one. It's very long. Wagner and I are like the same age, practically. We're not getting old. We've been old for a while.
Wow.
I'm not from here originally. I'm an adopted Nebraskan. Grew up in Philadelphia area, went to college in Philadelphia, came here for graduate school because this was one of the few forensic psychology programs in the country. And for a son of immigrants, that was a big move, right? My family all stayed together, but this was a great program that people didn't know about. And back many years ago, they didn't have a lot of those programs around. Now there's several more around. So, I had to, like a lot of people, had to work through school, the university, the professors here, the Doctors Cole and Rivers in particular, took this puppy from the puppy pile and said, we might adopt this guy and give him a chance. They gave me a free ride if I worked hard, and which was no problem, and helped me get my degree. So I'm indebted to them totally. Didn't think coming from Philadelphia area to Nebraska I was going to be sticking around long because, it's a little different here. But I have to say it more than grew on me. Then after getting my graduate training, did my follow-up training in Oklahoma City and in Worcester, Massachusetts, did my forensic residency postdoc, ended up coming back to Nebraska and been here ever since.
So was there something about the field that drew you? I mean, did you dress up as a forensic psychologist for Halloween, or was this something you stumbled onto later in life?
This is like Martin and Lewis. Yes. This is great. I love this. I didn't know how you could dress as a forensic psychologist. The reality was I was thinking medicine, but I realized, these folks have been dealing with managing violence, managing difficult situations, and I thought, hell, this is intriguing. They don't have a boring day. And I thought, you know what, I'll try it. I was skinny back then and scrawny. I'm still scrawny, but not skinny. But it was, was like, this was an area that was growing and that they were dealing with a lot of different things. And I thought, this isn't a good time to jump in.
Did you ever think you were going to be this needed? I mean, as time's gone on, it's just grown.
No, my original work was doing work with kids and abuse victims. And, you guys helped set up, the advocacy center, and we were learning how to interview kids and deal with child abuse, which is bad enough, right?
Yeah.
Child abuse in itself, unfortunately, still around, right? Grateful for all the work, all the joking aside you guys do to go after, sexual abuse, child abuse. And I was noticing, and I was connecting with some of your counterparts back then and guys at the State Patrol. I was seeing kids, being stalked and preyed upon. And I realized, you know what, if I want to deal with it, I'm going to deal with the people doing it rather than the people suffering from it. So that's what pushed me to do this. And, hell, back then, the notion of political threats and all that was even pre-9/11. There's nothing like that then. And even back at 9/11, it was like terror groups, things like that. They were still a distance. Now these things have sort of exploded a bit. And so, yeah, I wish, when we all talk privately, we wish we weren't so needed.
Yeah. I can remember, you talk about, the Oklahoma City bombing was one of the first ones that you could, like, the domestic terrorists. And now it's just like, it has spread so greatly, and you just don't know where it's going to come from, and no place seems to be sacred or safe because they go into elementaries and do this stuff.
Absolutely. If you think about it, back when Wagner and I were young, you had to...
When you guys rode horses in?
When bringing this up, yeah.
When horses... Before electricity.
When ships were made of wood and men were made of steel.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah.
My friend Columbus was still sailing. You had to join a group. You had to travel somewhere and do the jungle gyms and train, and you had to really be embedded and radicalized into a group. And, groups still do that, right? You think about what the old Klan did and the newer version of it, what the Nazis do, what other hate groups do. They do that. Terror groups still exist, but they've changed their strategy. And what we're seeing is they've become better at distance learning than any university or the University of Phoenix. They've figured out they can take credit if they inspire anybody who's pissed off how to do violence and how to do it. And so that's how our lives have changed. We're now looking at people who are being inspired to violence and having to do the behavioral analysis to try to pick them up before they escalate.
Yeah, no matter how good social media has, and it's done a lot of good.
It
has also created some avenues for bad people to do bad things.
It's helped them learn how to do it.
Yeah.
So when you went from shiny new University of Nebraska degree to where you're at today, what's your official title today? What were some of the positions, I guess, that you maybe held to get where you're at today? Or which ones haven't you held? I was joking with you before we went on air, but...
Well, my official day job is professor, University of Nebraska, professor of psychology. And, we can joke about academia, and it certainly deserves to be joked about. If you go to meetings with a lot of faculty colleagues, we tease each other, but it's like the bar scene from Star Wars, But on the other hand, it's where you got creative people and smart people who start thinking, wait a minute, why can't we do this differently and do it better?
Yeah.
And, the University of Nebraska is really good about that. Mm-hmm. You got some places where you have to stay very theoretical. This university is very good about engagement and outreach and doing research that applies to people out in the field. So I've been very fortunate to be employed somewhere that allowed me to do that work. It wasn't always understood, but people said, there's something here.
Sure.
Get out of his way, let him do it. My other work is with the Public Policy Center, which is a research center where we do a range of things from violence prevention, threat assessment, and management. We help train schools in school threat assessment safety. We're training mental health people to better assess risk, doing a lot in suicide prevention. I also consult with a lot of agencies. So I consult here in this community. I also do work with our state patrol, with situations they deal with the United States Capitol Police, with a range of other entities so that we can implement things, do a behavioral-based system So we figure out what risks, what threats we chase, and not get stuck in all the other noise.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can get caught chasing your tail if you don't really know what you're looking for.
It happens, right? And you can't ignore things, right?
Right. Absolutely. You can't ignore it.
You guys put on the badge and you swear the oath to make sure people are safe. You can't just pick and choose what you're dealing with.
I think the thing that's nice for us is you were touching on it earlier. You've been able to bridge the theoretical to the practical, and you're Dr. Scalora, but I mean we just know you as Mario, and I think that's nice.
Appreciate that
because and hopefully it's not disrespectful, but we just kind of consider you one on the team, and
appreciate that.
And so it's nice to be able to bounce stuff off of you, and when we have questions, what does this look like? What does that look like? We just have somebody we can pick up the phone and ask. So.
Yeah, not very many people have that kind of talent in their own backyard, and that's really nice.
Early on when I was doing the professor thing, people didn't understand that. They weren't anti-cop or anything. They just didn't understand that. Now that universities are figuring out how to engage more, it's something that's valued more, and frankly, it's worked both ways. Whenever we deal with things, I work with our university's threat assessment and management process. There are times when we all have to work together. It's great to be able to call each other. Good work is done with relationships, right? It's not done
Absolutely.
with protocols. The protocols are important, but relationships drive good work. And we've been very fortunate. People have had to figure out how to work together in this community to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good segue to just get to the meat and potatoes of the discussion. The threat management, threat assessment. For the people that are listening at home, that this can sound like a very just big topic. What is it? Is this like an umbrella term? How would you give an elevator speech of what threat assessment or threat management is?
Sure. It starts with the notion that most violence of one sort or another is planned, right? People just don't wake up one day and go, I'm just going to go hurt somebody seriously. There are times when it may happen, but it's pretty rare. What we've learned when we look at things like major stalking cases, when we look at all these shootings that took place, when we see people who threaten schools or government or workplaces, we've learned over the last 30 years that there were warning signs and that these things didn't happen out of the blue, and that if we work hard to educate people what the warning signs are, we catch it early, we catch people before they show up with a gun. And if they have other problems, we can do things to, like if they have a mental health issue, a mental wellness issue, right? We can find ways to divert them to get them on a pathway to someplace better. So 9 times out of 10, we're not having to do major intrusive stuff. There are times when no matter what our efforts, or because we catch things late, sometimes people have to come in with some serious muscle. Or, you have to, not everybody wants to de-escalate. And then we at least try to figure out who are the folks then who are that high risk.
Right.
So because, nowadays, and now with social media, with electronic communication, you can type with your thumbs fast, say things, and we have to figure out, all right, who are the people we got to worry about? And then deal with that, because with everything.
People get to take a different persona on social media from their in-person persona.
Absolutely.
I mean, they'll say things they would never ever say in person. So
even drunk, they wouldn't say some of those things. And you guys have dealt with people who talk different with alcohol.
Right. Yeah. Once in a great while.
Once in a great while.
You talked, when you were looking at schools, when you were coming up through college and graduate degrees, is threat assessment, and is that a new field of research comparatively, or when? What's kind of the history behind that field?
The research is relatively new, and it's a multidisciplinary thing,
Okay.
right? It's not a psychology thing. It's practiced by psychologists, law enforcement, people in the security field, human resource, other behavioral health people. Mm-hmm. So part of what we're doing is figuring out how we all work together, depending on the nature of it, right? I mean, for example, you guys have been through the training. There are times when you have to sort those things out. And in many respects, it's almost like, think about heart disease, right? We don't all have to be vascular surgeons to deal with the ugliest cases, but we all should know what chest pain looks like.
Sure.
And if chest pain hits, everybody should at least know what to look for and when to do CPR, when to call for 911, mm-hmm. right? That's sort of threat assessment. When we get to the more serious cases, that's when folks like us around the table have to come together and say, all right, this isn't just a little chest pain that somebody can see their cardiologist about. We're going to need to do some major intervention here because something bad could happen.
So is the goal of threat assessment to stop bad things from happening, mitigate things? What are the kind of the goals of the field, or what's success look like?
Generally, success is you're bored and we've prevented things, right?
Yeah.
The earlier we catch people, the easier it looks.
The news story that never happens.
Amen.
Yeah.
Now, we've all encountered situations where we caught something and the person had the weapon and they were getting close to getting in their car. Mm-hmm. Or they show up with a head of steam and somebody like yourself happens to show up and they get de-escalated, and we then start peeling back the layers and realize, okay, there's more here. Mm-hmm. This isn't just a sight and move on situation. So part of it is ideal, we prevent, catch it early. The other piece is if they are pretty close, we jump and mitigate. Sometimes, like when we're at a football game and we're doing our assessments, looking at concerning behavior, we're trying to catch the concerning behavior as quick as we can so that they don't have a chance to do it.
Yeah. We were just in a training recently, Ben, where, we talked about, for those of us that are in law enforcement, we have to look at the world through a lens of, criminal elements, and when someone has done something bad, then we kind of apply the law to that.
Correct.
But we have to look through it. We have to shift our lens a little bit when we're looking at preventing those things. Our criminal justice system isn't really set up to.
You can't arrest somebody
for something they might do.
Amen. Yeah. And nor should we.
Right.
Because that could be abused. We're not here to profile people or start playing Tom Cruise.
Right. So it's a different approach. We're not maybe necessarily contacting people with the intent of, I'm taking you to jail, but I'm probably going to have a conversation with you and hopefully have maybe some dialogue to try and figure out, hey, where are you at with things, and are there some resources that we can put in place? Is that?
No, that's a good summary. And occasionally, sometimes they need to hear from you, hear the boundaries, because you're not listening to us on the other thing. Right.
Well, that, and sometimes getting spotted, getting talked to, and getting identified, it takes them back a little bit, because all of a sudden, well, they're going to be watching me, and putting that in their head at that point in time too.
And knowing when that happens, for 90% of the folks, they get the hint.
Yes.
For some of them, we know they're going to ratchet up a notch, but we had to still meet with them. So it's always stepping, always evaluating the behavior to sort out, okay, when do we need to get in front of this?
Yeah.
And do that. So
part of the reason we do this show is to hopefully give people at home some sense of how we do what we do. I know there's just like there's no routine traffic stop, there's no routine threat assessment case. What would a hypothetical, kind of the anatomy of a threat assessment that you look at, how does it start, and maybe what are some of the basic steps that it goes through?
first of all, somebody has a concern and they may say, hey, I know this guy, Terry, and he concerns me. And they may be worried for his welfare. Mm-hmm. Or
family member, co-worker, could be a range of people, right? Sure. And all of a sudden, we have to figure out, all right, is this let's sit with the guy, figure out what's going on, and if he has a grievance, what's going on with that? Sometimes people have legitimate grievances. Mm-hmm. It's when they think they can do it in a pretty aggressive way. That's the problem, right? Mm-hmm. We're not here to adjudicate their grievance. We're here to say, we're worried for you. And sometimes, in like a third of the cases, they could also be suicidal. Sure.
Or it starts as a suicide call, but then we find out, you know what, they're very wound up at their partner or their spouse. We have to worry about the safety of their family. Mm-hmm. So part of what we're doing is opening our eyes to what is the risk trajectory, what's going on. 9 out of 10, that person isn't going to be the next shooter, right? They're mm-hmm. going to be someone, though, who may be in a bad place. Mm-hmm. Putting aside whether a crime took place or not, because let's say there's something arrestable here. They ain't staying long in lockup mm-hmm. very often. Yeah, it's rare. And, that's the nature of the situation. So part of what we do when we were doing our behavioral threat assessment trainings the last, 15 years now with our community law enforcement, it's not to say, hey, don't be cops. It's when you're being a cop and you see something, maybe in the case where the guy is having a grievance and he's not letting go. We can refer to mental health. We can do a lot of things. We can do co-responding, have people meet with them. But the grievance is still there. What are the cases where we need to keep an extra eye because they're not letting it go? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, most cases, people will let it go. But if they're not, all right, well, how are we going to put our heads together to make sure nobody gets hurt? And, the vast majority of cases, we're doing the dignity domino and the respect card. We're mm-hmm. making sure that people are saving face so they can walk away with something, which is what you guys do when you de-escalate anyway. So a lot of time, most of the time, we're directing people towards some assistance, trying to look at the behaviors where they are, and then we're talking to the people who are concerned and saying, look, let's keep an eye. If something flares up, let's come back together, or let us know, because there's still going to be situations, no matter what our best effort is, somebody's going to flare up anyway.
Right. You mentioned the interdisciplinary approach earlier, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary. So some of this is done in a group setting, maybe reviews then with what types of disciplines get together to put their heads together for that?
It depends, right? So for a law enforcement agency, for an agency like a sheriff's office or a police department, may only be 2 disciplines, right? Maybe you guys and a mental health person who's mm-hmm. a consultant. And that's fine because you're doing direct outreach. There's an immediate safety component to what you're doing. Our community has a threat assessment team where people come together, so it would be our human service agencies, behavioral health, our county attorneys, law enforcement, county and city, and they're going to brainstorm for a small number of cases where the risk is pretty significant, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of times they're relationship violence cases where somebody is stalking a former lover and they, you deal with a lot of domestic violence in law enforcement. It's probably one of the biggest things you deal with. These are the 1% who not only have been violent, but decided they're not letting go and they're going to stalk or go after somebody no matter what our efforts are. So these are often the cases where we have to put our heads together and say, all right, what are we going to have to do here? Keep this family safe, to keep other people safe, that type of thing.
What are some of the things that the academic community is bringing to that table? Is it research? Obviously, some matrices or things to look out for. How does that look from an academic standpoint?
The research is obviously a big thing, right? Being able to look at the beast and see not make assumptions of what we're dealing with. Mm-hmm. And if you do the research well, I'm just like, when I first started doing this here in Lincoln, Tom Cassidy was the chief of police. Tell you how far back that goes. I sound like Don Rickles doing a retrospective. But we started looking at like workplace violence cases.
Yeah.
And, there was this belief that was mainly just disgruntled employees or the occasional robbery. Well, we started eyeballing cases, and stalking and domestic violence were a big deal. Mm-hmm. And Tom was suspecting that. You guys were suspecting it. But, now we had the numbers, and then I could go to places like the University of Iowa, talk with them, and they were advising the federal government. And guess what? Now we have they were understanding that when we think about workplace violence, they added a fourth type, which was dealt with relational violence. That's an example. Mm. We've been very fortunate. We've been able to work with agencies and analyze cases and learn what are the risk factors so that if we ever have to go to a courtroom, we can say it's not just our opinion. We have the data to back us up, right?
Yeah.
Judges, the courts demand that we're not just going off impression, as they should.
Yep.
The other thing we're doing is we're trying to train people. Mm-hmm. One, trying to train people to think about how to deal with violence, and not just the trainees I have directly at the university, but for continuing education, people are already out in the field who need continuous training and maybe a little backup because they're not always comfortable dealing with these cases.
So if there is somebody listening at home that this is a field that intrigues them, whether or not they can figure out how to dress up as a forensic psychologist for Halloween, I don't.
Get a blazer.
Yeah.
Get a blazer, no Birkenstocks for this program. But,
right.
If you do...
You got to have the leather patch on your elbows.
So
those cost more.
Okay.
So what does that progression look like for somebody who's undergrad? Maybe they're even, figuring out what they want to do for grad school. What's the path like for that?
Well, all right. First of all, they're different paths.
Okay.
All right. So maybe you don't want to be a psychologist. Maybe you'd rather do something else. There's a lot of the folks I work with are in law enforcement, mm-hmm. and law enforcement's hiring.
We are at joinlso.com.
Yeah, we have openings right now. We do.
Some of the people I've learned a lot from mm-hmm. are folks like Tom, for example, Bill Zimmerman with the U.S. Capitol Police, mm-hmm. Andre Simmons, the FBI, and folks here locally, right? When you think about it, you can go into law enforcement, you could go into human resources, you could mental health, behavioral health, whether it's social work, counseling, psychology. Become a good professional at whatever suits your passion. Mm-hmm. And if you want to do work in violence prevention, then specialize some and learn more about it. Because there's plenty of room at the table.
Yeah.
We need everybody.
Yeah. Okay.
One of the questions I have, and I'll go off a little bit, when one of these violent, active shooter mm-hmm. acts of violence occur, the media comes back and they say, oh my gosh, look at all these red marks that they should have been able to see. Do you guys go back and look through those, or what do you learn from those?
We try. Yeah, we do. I mean, not to point fingers and say, oh, somebody messed up, but what is it we can learn from them so that you know what to look for? Because sometimes, when Columbine first hit, mm-hmm. nobody knew something like that could happen. Mm-hmm. Oklahoma City, nobody knew something like that. The threat evolves, right? Mm-hmm. People can now go online and learn how to set the bar for new violence, which is scary. So we have to, recent research we've done, we talked earlier about being inspired by extremists and hate groups. we wouldn't have thought of that 5-10 years ago. We're learning, part of that is how do we continue to look at how things evolve and try to get in front of it. I think the other thing is, too, we recognize sometimes we have limits, right? There was that shooting in Georgia. There was all this I did a media interview for a national outlet, and first part was, hey, we heard the FBI and the sheriffs did a threat assessment and they messed it up. Maybe health. Someday, I have a suit in my closet with big tire marks on it for when I'm going to get thrown under a bus someday.
Yeah.
No crap. You consult with Congress, you buy that the first thing. That and liability insurance. But when I looked into it, I said, let's chill a minute. I think don't go off the first impression, because what gets put out right away in social media is often wrong. Mm-hmm. When you started peeling back the layers, first of all, the FBI figured out who this guy was. They looked at the social media posts somebody reported, got this guy identified, and they went to the locals to say, hey, somebody's got to sit with this. Mm-hmm. Right? And then the sheriffs did go out, and they had the body cam video out there. They didn't do a bad interview. Mm-hmm. And at that time, he wasn't at risk. Mm-hmm. He became a risk when his father bought him a rifle a year later, thinking out loud. Now, there may have been other things going on. I'm guessing, and I could be wrong, that they also did some other things in the intervening period when he was with the other school district to keep an eye, So part of what we try to do is also have a realistic view of things can happen. We can't guarantee always we're going to know everything, but we got to guarantee a process. Mm-hmm. And if you do the process right, 99 out of 100, you're going to be successful. Mm-hmm. And we keep looking to up that number to be successful. And you also recognize that you're going to get second guessed no matter what you do. So this ain't for the faint-hearted.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Hindsight's 20/20. Yeah. It's easy to be right that then.
It is easy. And everybody's brilliant after the fact.
Oh, yeah.
And that's, what? That's okay. If I wanted to be bored, I'd do accounting.
Sure. Well, the research probably doesn't end, because you can always go back and what did we miss and why did we miss it? I suppose that's a whole thesis on that.
Well, just think about, that's true for any endeavor that matters, right? Mm-hmm. Whether you're a surgeon and you look at mishaps in an operating room, when you look at emergency room decision making and you have to make decisions pretty quick that have implications. Yeah. Traffic stops, how do you manage a situation that spins up, right? There is always things that happen that we can't anticipate because we don't always have the information in front of us.
Right. Yeah.
Or you don't have very long to react to it once you do know.
Yeah. And by the time it gets to you, right, you don't have a lot of time, and it's easy to second guess that you should have known something that's not available to you.
Sure.
And so part of our job is to try to train people to deal with some of that ambiguity and figure out how to do the best work with the info you have.
Hey, I'm Captain John Vik with the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. When it comes to your career, don't settle for good enough. Don't settle for ordinary. We won't either. Be different, be better, be exceptional. Start your future today at joinlso.com. Well, that's a good segue to talk about the UNL Public Policy Center. Mm-hmm. So what is the Public Policy Center, and what kind of services do you offer?
It's a research center within the university. We're totally self-funded. Taxpayer does not pay for the Public Policy Center to exist. We create our own existence as a university research center. And we do a lot of work where we're bridging research and consultation. The policy part is small p policy. It's not theoretical. It's how do we help the government implement things so that certain policy outcomes, positive outcomes, like whether it's safety, preventing suicide, helping kids get mental health services, helping schools figure out safety. How do you do those things, implement it, find evidence-based work, and apply it?
So it's back to that theoretical research to practical, and taking that data that you guys are finding from the research, and what does that look like then in public policy? Is that kind of how it works?
And implement. How do you implement it? How do you do this so that it works? And by the way, so you're not spending a fortune doing it.
Sure.
Because last I heard, nobody has a great budget running around anywhere. The sheriff almost choked on that. I think I created a flashback. Yeah. I'm sorry.
There's a whole nother story for where we go. We have to just dig for money whenever we need something. You can't just keep going back to the money tree. So, the Public Policy Center specifically, how does that interface with threat management stakeholders?
So I'm fortunate enough to have talented colleagues who work there, and Dr. Denise Bulling, who many of you gentlemen know. Dr. Bulling has a background in behavioral health, actually helped build crisis mental health services in our community in her prior life, and had to do that well. I mean, if you think about how our crisis mental health services are, how busy they are, we don't have enough beds to put all the folks in who need those services. So you have to figure out how do you triage it and make it work so that people don't get hurt.
Yeah.
And nobody gets hurt, and people get the care they need. And she has worked with me a lot for, a long time. We've worked a lot together, and we brainstorm how to implement things in communities, how to work together. We've been very fortunate that the state and federal government will contract with us or provide grants for us to do these things in return for our disseminating this, providing this to our communities.
Mm-hmm. I was looking at your website when we were getting ready for this episode, and you've got a few different kind of, I don't know if you'd call them branches within the Public Policy Center, but some that are dedicated to education, school safety, the health and behavioral health, some of the violence, suicide prevention. I'm sure there's others. What are there specific staff that's dedicated to that, or are those just kind of
We have
different?
a range of staff who do different things.
Okay.
I have, for example, Dr. Jennifer Meek, who does a lot of work in the area of school functioning. How do we get parents connected with schools better? How do we help kids get more access to mental health services through their schools so that schools have to take the kids as they are.
What do we say, Ben? It's you coach the kids that show up.
Coach the kids that show up.
That's right. The kids, and the communities create situations, and kids arrive there either whether they're eating well, whether there's mental health issues, whether there's violence in the home, whatever it is. And again, most parents are working hard, doing a good job, but we have to take we're coaching the kids who show up. And how do we get them the help so that, because there are future workers and they're paying Social Security down the road for us, right? And, and how do we, we're trying to make sure we're improving their quality of life.
Yeah.
So there's that work. We have Quinn Lewandowski does amazing work with suicide prevention among some of the other staff who work with him. Dr. Janelle Walther doing work with schools as well as community engagement, for example. Mentioned Dr. Bulling, Dr. Stacy Hoffman, who's been great in applying scientific work, methods to a range of things, and how do we look at various public health issues, for example, such as opioids, as one example, or how our courts operate. So when our problem-solving courts are doing things, we can have the data to tell us when they're working well.
Right.
And what kind of people they're working well with. So that's just a range of some of the things we're doing.
how many staff are employed by the Public Policy Center roughly? I mean, you've got some that are researchers.
I have students and researchers, somewhere between 30 and 40. It fluctuates, when I count the students.
Okay,
but close to 40.
Yeah, and then some just administrative staff too that keep the place running.
They're part of that 40. Yeah,
okay.
They're very important. You cannot manage. We have almost 80 projects going at one time.
Yeah,
that cover all four corners of the state. We have a range of funding entities we work with. Mm-hmm. And so as a result, I need a very talented contract grant management staff who keep us afloat and out of jail.
That would be preferable.
Well, every funding entity has their rules, right? We got to follow the rules, as we should.
And
we have to
be a lot of rules and a lot of paperwork.
Absolutely, and they do their thing, so I can do mine. I am extremely great. I cannot do this work. We talk about all this sexy stuff about violence prevention. If our staff aren't working those things, I can't do that work.
Yeah. Well, Sheriff, you always
stay in your lane.
Well, and you like to remind it. You appreciate it when we keep you out of trouble.
That's right.
I think that's kind of how you put that sometimes. So
we try anyway.
Yeah.
They keep me from going to jail. So that's an important role of our staff.
Somewhere in the job description, I think. So
it shouldn't have to be a full-time avocation. I'm presuming it's right.
He usually behaves himself.
I was guessing that.
Well, speaking of the staff positions you have. www.ppc.unl.edu is the website for the Public Policy Center, and you guys are currently hiring research specialists.
We are, and if you have the background, please. And we're always looking to hire good people, and because we're called soft money, we're constantly developing funding streams. We do not have a state funding line or a university funding line. Mm-hmm. So if we don't manage those contracts, we don't feed our staff. So we are doing that. And because we've grown, we brought in a fair number of staff. Mm-hmm. We also have staff who promote up and go into other things. They get their degrees while they're with us. And they end up taking on other opportunities and do that. And we promote up a lot of our staff. So there's always opportunities coming up. So feel free to look at our website.
Yeah, ppc.unl.edu is where you can go to find more information about that. What's new at the Public Policy Center? Is there anything you guys are working on? Big projects? I know you can't talk about all of them, but
we have a lot of long-term relationships we're very proud of. We work a lot with HHS and behavioral health, the public health people looking at different things. We mentioned the opioid response as an example. Mm-hmm. We've been doing some research looking at violence prevention, particularly the statewide reporting line, Safe to Help. That's available for students. Mm-hmm. We are helping the state implement 988, which you folks are a part of. 988 got implemented very fast across the country. People had to figure out how do you protocol getting mental health services out and do it safely. Mm-hmm. Because there's still times when that person may not be interested in the service. And, it's working out, but how do you do it?
Well, my generation, 911 has just always been a thing.
Right.
But I know there was a time we put 911 on our cruisers because that was kind of the number that we were wanting to direct everybody to. And now we've come full circle where there's a lot of agencies that are starting to put 988 on their cruisers and a lot of their branding stuff. So it's interesting to see that program take flight a little bit. And hopefully it continues to do that so people can get access to resources.
Right. And, we're doing our threat assessment research and looking at how certain extremist hate group stuff may influence activity. We're looking at work around how we can better train mental health practitioners to do risk assessment, threat assessment. So we're doing a lot there. And by the way, these things aren't like you just throw people a manual and you move on. Like 988, there's still times you need a cop there. You need a sheriff deputy there.
Yeah, you need law enforcement. Yes.
You're going to need law enforcement there because there are times when people are in a very difficult spot and they're not going to be willing to accept any assistance. And the safety issue may be very intense. And part of what we got to do is make sure we sort that out so nobody gets hurt, right?
Well, fortunately, we're at a time in America where there's, very little political rhetoric and, things aren't ramped up at all and everything's very stable.
Yes. So you're captain in charge of Pollyanna.
Yeah, right. yeah. We can hope.
We have a few things going on lately. People are a little wound
A
more than usual.
little bit wound up, yeah.
And with going online, people just find things to wind them up more.
Yeah.
If we could just have a social media respite for part of the day, I think people might actually relax and talk to each other.
2 weeks to flatten the curve on that, maybe. I don't know. Time out.
I don't know if 2 weeks.
Might probably take longer than that. Yeah.
There's going to have to be a shift change at some point, right? Yeah. Because part of the problem is you have outsiders who like stirring that stuff up and watching other people get wound up. Mm-hmm. Put aside the politics. If I've had to deal with people threatening politicians a long time, done it for over almost 30 years. And, if you sit people down, they could agree on a lot of stuff. It's gotten to the point, though, where people were believing that if you disagree on some things, you're the Antichrist. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We've personalized stuff so much that, it's not just at Thanksgiving when the crazy uncle shows up.
Well, it's also one issue, politics sometimes in people's minds.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They're only worried about one thing and they can't, everything else they agree on, but that one thing and it just takes over them.
And for whatever reason, if you disagree with me about something, that means you're evil.
Yeah. You can't have different thought patterns.
No. And, most of this is if you raise kids, you figure out you can't think that way because, sometimes people disagree with you for the hell of it,
Just for sport.
Just for sport. Yeah. Right. We're going to have to figure out, you deal with the after effects of it, right? Mm-hmm. You're dealing with the intense edge of that.
Yep.
When you deal with the folks who make it an Olympic sport to have a grievance and get wound up. That's why you guys get called in.
Yes. Yeah.
It's going to get, we're going to have to figure something out.
Yeah, it's so polarizing anymore that, we don't get anything done anymore. And it hurts people. Yeah. It really does. Our government locks up and over just one issue, and nothing else that really could help some folks down the line gets done because they can't get to it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is a public safety show, and I kind of want to bring it back to, it's a question we ask a lot of guests that come on. How does threat management and the Public Policy Center make Lancaster County and really beyond, the world safer?
Well, first of all, you guys are doing the heavy lifting. I'm just advising things. It's easy to sit in the background and advise things, right? You guys are the ones having to do the heavy lifting. We're successful because of our partners. That is our mantra at the PPC. All kidding aside, we can talk about how things have gotten sort of sideways.
Sure.
I know it's a family show, so I won't use certain words, but but there are a lot of good people out there doing good work, whether they're in law enforcement, hospitals, military, schools, doing things. Part of it is we try to figure out ways to help people figure out the tools, and not because, we're just smarter than anybody. That's not the issue. We've become smarter because we've listened and had to learn from each other. Mm-hmm. And also apply some tools to make sure the information works and makes sense and it's scientifically sound. So how we do it is we partner. and we work with good people who are wanting the same thing. And, when you take that approach, there's no shortage of a lot of people wanting the same thing.
Yep.
Even though we just talked about how we can't, reality is there are a lot of good people working their butts off doing stuff.
Yeah, agreed. Well, someone that is just entering the field, what does the future of threat management look like, 10, 20 years down the road?
That's a great question. I don't know yet, but I think we're going to be busy still.
Yeah.
There's a lot of employment opportunities for different things. I mean, how 30 years ago when we talked, we wouldn't have thought about this kind of conversation. Things will evolve, and, there's this old joke, somebody lamented to God they never won the lottery. And at one point, this voice booming down says, well, then buy a ticket.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just got to show up and do something.
Right.
And that's what I tell my trainees.
Get in the game.
Get your butt out there and do something.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm not a decent threat assessor because I'm a good threat assessor because I work hard to be a good psychologist, and I work hard to be good at different things. Just like the people in law enforcement, education, you got to work hard to be good at something, and frankly have a little humility that you got to learn something first.
Yeah.
So what I tell new people is make your bones first, get out there and learn something, just work hard and understand that there are people out there you can learn from, and shut up and listen.
Yeah. Well said. I mean, we sure enjoy the heck out of working with you. It's been
Likewise.
It's been fun having you here, and I know we'll continue to collaborate, and we're glad that you and the PPC are just a stone's throw away so that we can reach you. But,
Thank you. Well, you know how to find people.
I do have one last.
Yeah, go ahead.
On all the individuals, that you are working with and the cases you take, we have, the hate groups, but the lone wolf and those kind of things. What do you find the most difficult thing to wrap your hand around on these two?
There are a range of challenges, right? I think anybody, the problem is anybody could be a lone actor now and do it. Any mouth breather can go online and learn how to raise hell and do it.
Mm-hmm.
And if they have a serious mental illness and they're not getting treated and they have this stuff going on, makes it even more challenging. It's not, and again, we got to say this because you get this. Most of the folks out in our communities who are dealing with this are never going to be dangerous. Now, mental illness doesn't make people dangerous.
Correct.
It's sort of like alcohol. Alcohol doesn't make people dangerous, but if you got really wrong thoughts and you got delusions,
the right combination,
you throw it on top of things like kerosene by itself, but you put it near a flame, kaboom, right? And so it's just trying to find ways to try to keep the kerosene from the flame on occasion. That's the thing we think about. When I encounter cases after the fact, the saddest thing is seeing that, hell, would have been nice if we could have prevented it.
Right.
Yeah.
The Vegas shooting, Jason Aldean, they're still searching on why he went and did that, and they have not ever been able to figure out what was his cause, what set him off.
Yeah.
And that's always been, he's probably the number one.
He's been one of the exception
cases,
because you could count on one hand how many of those shooters didn't throw out breadcrumbs in advance. Now, the FBI did an analysis on that, and I don't know how much of that's out there publicly. There may have been some indication maybe of some mental illness. Certainly he kept it under wraps.
Yeah.
And there's his girlfriend or wife or whoever this significant other was who likely was told some of these things. Who knows? This is total speculation. The fact that they were bringing up cartons full of ammunition and high-grade weaponry somewhere may have raised some questions, and the fact that she may have been assisting him with part of it.
I think she was in the Philippines when that occurred, though.
Well, yeah, but I think, and my guess is she may have been somewhat coerced, possibly. I don't get the impression she was maniacally planning, but there was obviously some awareness going on. So she may have been aware, but may not have been in a good place to have reported it, right? Yeah. How do we try to find ways to get people to come forward and do it safely is going to be something where you want a young up-and-comer, hell, that's a good place to start.
Yeah, I think that's maybe the call to action on the whole thing is, and we talk about this at Husker football games when we're getting ready for this. It's the see something, say something now. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think there's a lot of that just diffusion of responsibility. Somebody else is going to do it. Mm-hmm. I don't want to get involved. And if we could curb some of that.
Or what if I'm wrong and I get embarrassed?
Yeah,
All of that.
There's a lot of inhibitors that people get in their brain that stop them. And if we can knock some of those down.
Well, one of the things we always say, people will say, well, I'm sorry you called. And I said, you know what? I'd rather 100 times have you call and us not be needed than the one time that we're needed and you don't call.
Hell yes.
Yeah.
Amen.
I get, so many times we get these, I know you're busy. I don't want to bother you with this. And it's like, that's what we're here for.
Yeah. You're paying your taxes to bother us.
Bother John all you want.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's, no, I agree. And, mass gatherings are an area where we spend a lot of attention. Yeah. Because we want to make sure our friends and we all have people we care about in those seats.
Absolutely.
Well, and, like in Wisconsin, that parade, who would have ever thought somebody would have drove their car through all that and did so much damage? I mean, it is everywhere, and no place is too small to have something really bad happen.
Right. That's true. And so there's a reason why the sheriff has gray hair.
He stays up late at night worrying about these things, don't you, sir?
Just when we didn't go on video today, you were able to give visual descriptions for people. This is great.
I'm in a glass house chucking boulders.
Well, Dr. Mario Scalora, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you.
It's been great to sit with you and visit, but just to learn a lot about the threat.
Thank you, guys.
Process.
Thank you, guys, for everything you do. What is the name of that website if somebody wants to work with you again?
JoinLSO.com is where people can go to learn more about career opportunities with the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office.
From being a forensic psychologist to being a deputy sheriff, we'd probably take you.
You'd be that desperate, huh? I don't know if I could pass all the requirements now. As
we'll have to do a follow-up episode after your academy experience.
Little life experience,
I may have some life experience, but man, I don't know if I could meet all the physical requirements at this point.
Wow. Well, as long as you get past the mental part.
Okay. I could probably do that, but
I better turn this off before it gets carried away.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mario, for being here.
Take care of you guys. Thank you.
That is all the time we have for today's episode of the 902 podcast. We appreciate you tuning in. Be sure to follow us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you enjoy listening to podcasts. You can also reach out to us on social media at LSO Nebraska on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and YouTube. To learn more about career opportunities at the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office, be sure to visit us at joinlso.com. You can also reach out to us via email at lso@lancaster.ne.gov. We hope to catch you on a future episode of the 902 podcast. Thanks for listening.